right, good morning everyone, and welcome to the 7th Annual DC Public Sector Summit for Amazon Web Services. Appreciate you all showing up. It's day one, 8 o'clock. You're all here and registered. That is test number one. Test number two is how good your questions are for these panelists. So for those of you who weren't at reInvent last year, you missed one of the most profound panels. So who believes that the government isn't innovating and isn't modernizing? If you raise your hand, you don't belong in this session, because we're going to disprove that myth. These guys here are the Star Wars Rebel Alliance of technologists in the government. So I'm going to do you all a favor. I'm going to talk very briefly, just introducing the panel and saying that this panel is four of the smartest people that we have working in the U.S. government right now. So no pressure, guys. Yeah, no pressure. So Matt Cutts is the administrator of U.S. Digital Services, and he's joining us newly appointed to the post, too, correctly?
Glad to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris Lynch, who is a return panelist, is the Director of Defense Digital Services. Thank you for returning.
Thank you.
Hunter Price, Lead Air Force Digital Services. And then Chris McKeever, I have your title as Jedi. Originally, I just had it as...
Stack up to these directors.
Okay. All right, someone's got to deliver results. Originally, I just had the technical guy.
Down there, I'm the service lead.
The service lead, okay, we'll go with that. So let me start off with just a couple broad questions. So I'll ask a few leading questions, and then I'm going to turn it out to the audience. So it's your responsibility to make sure you have very profound questions for these guys to tease out what they're doing inside the government to help with modernization. So first, dispelling the myth that the government doesn't modernize. You all are modernizing. Can each of you very briefly share real quickly what you're working on and how it's helping the government modernize? Chris, if you don't mind starting.
Sure. So, our portfolio, and a good way to think of what Defense Digital Service is about, is the idea that we can bring in some of the best talent from private sector to really make an impact within the Department of Defense. I like to say that where we come in, and a big difference between us and maybe like a traditional CIO group, is that we're really mostly focused on where technology fails the mission. So we like to come into things where it's not looking so good, so we kind of function like a SWAT team of nerds, right? We come into a place where generally things aren't super great. And that portfolio spans all the way from probably our most popular program, which is something called Hack the Pentagon, which is a bug bounty program that we run on basically both private and public assets within the Department of Defense. So everything from recruiting systems, and as a matter of fact, we have one running right now called Hack the Air Force. All the way to GPS OCX, it's the next generation ground control software for the new version of GPS to make sure that you guys don't drive into lakes and things like that when that thing launches. And there we're doing DevOps and making sure that automation happens so that the things that we're creating can actually be done in a reasonable way that we can trust and actually feel confident in. So that's the type of stuff that we're doing. I mean, we've got projects, probably about 7 different things. We've been in about 20 different programs throughout the entire Department of Defense, and happy to talk more about those throughout the day.
Hunter?
So I help lead the Air Force side of Defense Digital Service, which includes a couple of things that Chris just mentioned, Hack the Air Force and GPS OCX, which Chris will talk about later. Another project that falls under our portfolio that I think would be good to talk about today is the Defense Personal Property System, which is a software application that service members use to move their household goods when they change duty stations, which happens every couple of years for everyone in the military and their families. So in terms of scale, that's 1.7 million service members, plus their families, plus hundreds of thousands of civilians moving every year. They use an antiquated tool that does not work very well. It does not serve them well when they are undergoing one of the more stressful events that a family has to undertake. Yeah, I'm choosing my words very carefully. I think anyone in the audience who's in the service or has family in the service probably has stronger words that they would use. So we are helping the U.S. Transportation Command modernize that tool and the ecosystem around it, and part of that means using better platforms.
Look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah.
Matt.
Hey everybody, good to be here this morning. So while everybody else is at the Pentagon, I'm at USDS headquarters, and so we have a lot of other agencies in our portfolio. So for example, Department of Veterans Affairs, making it easier to get your healthcare benefits, so you can get you some initial results about whether you can get health benefits in 10 minutes instead of waiting 137 days for the paper process. Basically, anytime we see piles of paper, we get excited. And that can be piles of paper in doctors' offices. So we help with something called quality payments program, so that instead of just paying for the sheer number of tests that you do as a doctor, you actually get paid for outcomes and the quality of care, things like that. We also help a little bit with DHS, Department of Homeland Security. So over 8 million people apply for immigration every year. And so whenever you look at H-1B visas or a lot of different types of applications, many of those are paperwork right now. We have teams all kinds of places, small business administration, so helping historically underutilized businesses, and trying to figure out how we can clear out the process and the policy and make it easier for better tools to launch a little bit faster is sort of our North Star.
Thank you. So Chris, is it true that one of your jobs is hacking the Pentagon?
I actually can't say I have or have not. But as a team,
Can neither confirm nor deny.
I cannot confirm nor deny. I actually joined USDS, where Matt was just talking about 8 months ago, and recently, 2 months, 3 months ago, I'm now part of DDS, which is part of the Pentagon digital service. So I've had an interesting career at USDS. I've run kind of the cleanup hitter on a lot of projects. So I've heard the horror stories that the other team members have witnessed, and I've helped bring them to light and saw the results, such as refugees. When I was part of the USDS program, we helped the refugee count get to 80,000 in 2016. So that was one great one that I really saw the benefits, and I heard some really nasty stories going into. Now on the Department of Defense side, I've run kind of cleanup hitter for OCX, which is the next generation GPS, trying to keep you guys out of the lake. And I've seen some amazing breakthroughs on that using AWS and DevOps, and just trying to change the philosophical culture of some of the contractors and consultants and people within the Department of Defense and not within the Department of Defense to use this kind of things. The current project we're starting to spin up that's going to super rely on AWS is the military recruitment processing. So right now it's 5 or 6 different or 20 different solutions, all self-hosted in some crazy butt place in North Chicago. It's really bad. So we're going to take all that, put it in the cloud, and really modernize the way they're thinking about it and the way they're doing it.
So Chris, you just hit on one of the key topics, modernize the way things are going on. What does modernizing the government mean? We all know what modernizing commercial industry means. What does modernizing government mean?
So I think the easiest way is just to let them know that there's things being done a lot differently. It doesn't have to be the best. It just doesn't have to be what they're doing now. I feel the government gets in their rut and they do things because it feels good, because they're used to it. So to me, modernizing is just to snap them out of that, let them know there's other ways to do things, and then help guide them down that path to try them. And I've failed on a lot of things out in the private sector, but that's kind of where I learn and I go. And one of the things I wish the government would kind of move towards is understanding that failures are good, failures are learning opportunities, and yeah, as long as we don't launch some offensive because of it,
We're okay.
So that's the bar. Anything short of that, we're good.
yeah.
Chris, you had an answer too.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. A lot of times what we end up going into is we'll go into agencies where, they may have had a failed acquisition that's trying to come in to replace something, and so they're sitting with really, really old shit that's been sitting out there for a very long time. And at the end of the day, I think that the thing that everybody struggles with is, hey, how do we end up replacing that, and where do we go? And if you lean on the lessons that you've been leaning on for the past 20 years for those solutions, we're kind of going to end up in the exact same place that we were before, right? So the benefit that I think of a team like us is that we're not really, I don't think of us as having anything to do with the word innovation. As a matter of fact, I hate the word innovation. I like to say that we're, as opposed to going to moonshots, we're kind of interested in all these little roof shots, right? Little things that we can do to make things a lot better and have impact. And I think that there's a big opportunity there, right? You can bring a team like us in, and we can just look at it and we can say, well, here's a mix of things that we could do. It doesn't have to be the best solution, like Chris said. It just has to be better than what it is today and more secure, and it has to be a little bit more reliable, and it has to be a little bit more of a solution that we can trust, right? We don't want to leak PHI. We don't want to leak PII. We don't want to have any of these things happen, and everybody's always in violent agreement on that stuff. But yet we kind of still use the same old things in the same old ways, and that's not okay. Like a lot of times what I say is it's not okay, right? How we're doing it is not the way that we should be doing this.
So I'm going to take this, because everyone embraces change. People love change.
Is that true?
So Matt, because everyone just jumps in when you guys have a good idea and says, yes, how do we do this? I'm assuming there may have been a time or two where someone said, slow down or no. Can you talk about anyone who has been a blocker or an impediment, or any organization or someone who's slowed you down, and how you circumvented that process?
Yeah, man. This one guy, John, he was, no, I'm just kidding. No, it's interesting because I was talking to the former administrator of the U.S. Digital Service who helped rescue healthcare.gov, and his point of view was that the U.S. Digital Service exists to take risk. Because things that we know work, things in this room, DevOps, the cloud, modern deployment, continuous integration, all this stuff that has been, battle-tested, time-proven, all these things that we know.
Not just a fad, right?
Not just a fad. No, it's the new way of doing things. A lot of people have not been exposed to that before, so it seems risky. So the crazy thing is, it's like risk arbitrage. We're willing to do the stuff that seems risky, even though it's actually pretty straightforward to do. Yeah. And that can be at a tactical level. We can basically sit with teams and say, let's just try an example. Let's create some momentum and do something small so that you can see that this is working, as opposed to, you've never seen anything like this before. How do you know that we're going to be able to deliver? And it can also be large. So the embracing of things like user-centered design. So a very simple example. At VA, Veterans Affairs, they were trying to get a particular change through, and they were running into some resistance, as you mentioned. And one of the tools that they found incredibly useful was to film an average, everyday veteran trying to use the current system. And they had a horrible problem. It turned out you needed to have both the right version of Internet Explorer, and yes, it did have to be Internet Explorer, and the right version of Adobe Acrobat. And if you didn't have the right ones, you would get an error message, and the error message wasn't helpful, by the way. So this was a veteran who'd gone to a public library 4 or 5 times trying to fill out this form to get his health benefits. And all they did was record, his name was Dominic, there's you can find this video online, record Dominic trying to get his health benefits and seeing the struggles that he was going through and why he couldn't, do what should be a very simple web form hosted in the cloud, really cleared the way and got a lot of resistance so that they were able to make good progress.
So Hunter, I'm assuming that you needed some air cover to get a GPS up and running, pun intended. How did the Air Force get permission to use a commercial cloud?
Well, there's 2 ways. I think, and I'll talk about what enables us to be successful, and actually that is air cover. So playing off what Matt said, we are here to take risks, and the reason that is necessary is because a lot of people find themselves throughout the government unable or unwilling to take risks. So we'll run up against someone who knows what they're doing is not doing a good job. people who sit in the VA, I don't think many of them have thought we are serving every single one of our veterans in the best possible way. It's not like the people who are working on OCX or any one of the other projects that we've worked on have been thinking to themselves, everything is great. They're just not willing to take risk, or they're not able to take risk, or they don't know what risk they should be taking. So what is absolutely necessary is some sort of air cover. So at Transcom or at SMC, where GPS sits, we have really great relationships with the commanding officers, the 3, the 4-star level, who know that in order to be successful in their mission, to deliver the capabilities that this country needs, they have to take some risk. And with their backing, we're able to say, like, okay, we're going to try some things differently, and we're going to use the stuff that we know works, the stuff that's not a fad, and we'll learn some lessons. Worst case scenario, best case scenario, we will dramatically improve a project. Yeah.
All right.
Chris might want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add on that, I think in general, when you look at, in this particular case, it was kind of a weird confluence of events, right? We had the vendor who was building GPS OCX. There were just a lot of challenges. We couldn't get new servers deployed. It took a lot of work to get a build. I think we've talked about this before. It was taking 3 months to get a build, right? And part of it is they were sometimes servers would be wiped, sometimes they wouldn't be wiped, so the environments were not necessarily conducive to really good testing. So when we come in and we say, hey, we want to view the staging and the testing environments as sort of an elastic resource, there's only so many ways you're going to solve that, right? And the one thing is that every single time those servers are going to be pristine, and every single time those servers are going to run the same tests, and every single time we're going to spin them up, right? So what's the solution? Well, the solution wasn't something that we had. So we had to literally fight, and actually Amazon got to witness it firsthand, fight to get what was considered an impact level 5 solution running on top of GovCloud, right? And the second that happens, it makes sense. Then everybody's like, oh, I get it. Now it's something that took 3 months and now it's 3 hours. That's how it should be. That's the world that we come from, right? And that makes sense once you see the result. But unless you actually know that that's going to be the payoff, I think it's really hard to take those risks, right? So a lot of times what we can do is, because we can take that risk and because of the fact that we have that top cover, we can actually go out and do something just to show that it can be done. And believe me, the number of people that I have talking about DevOps with me now, and at the craziest levels of the Department of Defense leadership is insane. It's
impressive.
Yeah, no, it's like the most random people will be like, let's talk about DevOps. And you're like, wow, this is the Secretary of the Air Force talking about DevOps. Like, that's so crazy to me. But that's awesome, right?
That is. So you said taking something that took 3 months and turning it into 3 days. I have
3 hours.
3 hours. I have a somewhat sterile question here. How fast can you move? I'm going to make it more fun. How can we speed up the government to be 100 times more efficient than it is right now?
So, one thing that's been interesting to me, and I don't want to talk up the U.S. Digital Service because there's a ton of people doing this kind of work throughout government, outside government, at contractors. I think the important thing is that there are examples where this goes well, and then other people can see those examples and they can say, oh, this isn't as big of a risk as we thought. So I think, let me just add that caveat to everything we're saying. But one thing that's interesting is from now 2.5 going on 3 years of trying to help improve government systems, we see that there are a lot of flaws, a lot of problems, a lot of compliance dressed up as security. So for example, the idea of trusted internet connections or TICs or cloud access points or CAPs or authority to operate. I was at Google for 16 years and I'd never heard of an authority to operate. We just decided to do something and then we did that thing. And so the notion that you'd need to get permission to do it after you've already decided to do it, I didn't quite understand that. And so in the process of working on this for the last 2-3 years, we've said, okay, here are some snags, and it's almost like with the SWAT team, they can take those lessons and then they can go back and work with partners, the Office of the Federal CIO, people who work on policy, and we can try to clear out some of those obstacles. So I think 100 times speed up is hard, although 3 months to 3 hours is pretty darn good. Yep. But trying to clear out those obstacles so that everybody can move a little faster is, I think, another way to approach it.
So you were talking about how everyone is now starting to talk about DevOps, agile environment. How do you find, grow, and build the talents necessary to live in this with these new modern technologies? And anyone can take that.
So for the OCX project, what we did was we isolated a few people that either already knew about DevOps or were really interested in it. And that's how we kind of internally plant that seed. And once that starts going, they get more people on board, more people start to see the benefits, and it just hopefully blossoms within the organization. There is always the top down where upper management may not envision, like Chris was saying, they might not see these benefits, and you have to wait till that light switch moment happens. But really, it's the internal embrace. You just find the key people that can help make this happen, and you just give them their air cover, you give them the tools, you kind of cut through some policy and some BS that might be there, as Matt was saying, and you just show them the light. They'll go towards it, and then everybody else will follow.
So there were two comments there. The one was, wait for the light switch to go on. The other was show them the light. So there's this balance between, do you find people who have a predisposition or can be educated, or can everyone figure this?
I think it's a predisposition. I think everybody can be educated, but to everybody's point, there's some people that just don't want to open up and acknowledge this until they see it. So you have to find the people that are willing to take the risk with you, giving them the knowledge that you're going to assume just as much, if not more, of the risk on this whole thing. They're just along for the ride until they're ready to take off themselves.
We consistently find two types of people. One is the antibody, the one who does not want to do something new, very resistant to change. And the other person that at least I always see showing up to when we show up to a new project is the person who wants to change, who is open to something new, who might actually already know everything there is to know about DevOps, about agile development, about how existing policies are failing the mission. They just haven't been empowered or enabled. And to kind of riff on the SWAT team metaphor, a really important thing that we try to do is to, leverage those people that we find. So, when we show up, we can multiply our forces. We, like Chris was saying, just give them the top cover and say, you know what, you're doing a great job. There's a team at U.S. Transportation Command who has been working on fixing the DPS application and a lot of other issues they have well before they showed up. And when we showed up, we found them really quickly and just said, you know what, we are going to do everything we can to prop you up because you guys are here for the long haul and we want to enable you.
So you talked about, I don't know if I want to call it a failure, but something that was not going well. And I think in this new world of experimentation and moving fast, we are prone to, I'll paraphrase Jeff Bezos, if you don't like criticism, for God's sakes, don't do anything original. And so we're experimenting, and experiments aren't all successful by definition. So are there any examples that you can share with us of where you experimented, failed, and course corrected? Because I think that's one of the things that will help the rest of the government learn to experiment, is when we can talk about an experiment, a failure. But if it's still a sensitive subject.
No. We actually, I think that's the thing is that, so before I actually directly answer that, I just want to say one thing. One of the things that I hear all the time is that, at least in the Department of Defense, the most common argument that I will hear is that we can't iterate quickly like the private sector because people's lives are at stake. I want to be very clear. We must iterate quickly because people's lives are at stake. If you don't fail while the thing's in development, you will fail when it's in production. That is far, far worse. We do it every day. People will die then, right? That's how serious our mission is. And we have it backwards. So when we talk about failure and we talk about iteration, we're talking about the ability to deliver quickly upon the mission in a successful way. And we must figure out ways to get there quickly. So we have a number of projects, and we do these things all the time. We're doing Run right now. If you know anybody at the Department of Defense, there's this product that is called Defense Travel System. It is really loved. Everybody thinks it's great. Everybody thinks it's the most awesome thing. They wish that they could use it in their personal lives to book their next vacation for their family, right? Because everybody wants to spend 5 days booking their trip, right? So here's the thing. We're working on basically replacing that, right? We're working on ways to pilot and test out different approaches to how to do travel by leaning on industry, which has figured this out, right? You guys go to home and you book your family vacation, you know how to do it. Here's the thing. We started this off a while ago, and we ran into every problem that you could imagine. Like, just honestly, nothing went right. Like, it was just like, it felt like pushing this massive boulder up this mountain every single time. And towards the end of last year, I was like, you know what? It's not going well. We need to stop. Like, something is not right. And what we did, and at least internally, and this is the thing, and like, this is kind of weird for government in a way. We went back to the team. We put a whole new team on, whole new approach. We met with all the leadership again, and we said, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Are you bought in? And they were kind of like, yeah, of course we're bought in. Of course we're bought in. We're like, And then we kind of went back and we said, well, here's the thing. Here's what we want in order to do this, because now we know that we have failed. We have completely failed. We have not lived up to our end of the bargain, right? That falls on us. And we said, but here's the thing. If you don't want to do that, then we're done. But here's the date. By this date, we need this. We have to make these changes by this exact date. And they were like, oh, they didn't think that we were serious. And we were very serious. And here's the thing. They actually did those changes because of the fact that I think that everybody's bought into this idea that we want to do change. It's just that sometimes it's not easy, right? That risk is not easy. We fail on things all the time. Every single one of our projects is quick. Chris mentioned military, the military entrance processing stuff that we're working on. That project we have riffed on like 4 times before we finally hit the ground running and have figured out the way to do it. And you guys have made awesome progress, right?
Yeah, so Brandon down there was kind of taking charge of it, but we had noticed military processing was kind of backwards. A lot of paperwork getting lost, and we went in and we were like, we have some ideas. And they were like, no, we don't want your ideas. We have all these security issues that we need to take care of right now. So we kind of helped them go down the path of this, like, this is how you guys can fix it. And we really tried to lobby for AWS and stuff. And they were like, great, thank you, but no thank you. And then finally we were like, all right, to Chris's point, we're done playing nicely with you guys. Well, either fix your stuff or do it the wrong way and fail, but we're out on that one because we see it coming. And they were like, are you serious? And we're like, we're dead serious. And they're like, all right, what will it take? And it's just like, we just need the go-ahead. So they gave us the go-ahead, and now we've been moving full steam for the last couple months, getting a lot of progress. And it was just a complete like night and day shift of their mentality as well as our mentality. We failed like gracefully helping them, and we finally realized, no, we have to do what's in our hearts versus like what's gonna make them happy. And that's what we learned.
I love that. Oh, you got one more thing, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience.
So just to riff off what the Chris's have said, a thing that I think we hear in the Pentagon a lot, and folks at USDS have heard since USDS has been around, is failure is not an option. And it's just so wrong. Like, the US government fails all the time in incredible ways. The US military fails all the time. And
It's true.
yeah, just just mind-blowing failures. And I think
It feels cathartic, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Just
it's good in front of
open
an
up.
audience.
the thing
Open
that we
up.
bring to the table is the acknowledgement that not only is failure always an option. There's never a scenario where failure isn't an option. It's always on the table. But that if we just embrace that and acknowledge that, you know what, we're going to take some risks, we're going to make some bets, we're not going to bat 1,000. That doesn't ever happen. That's not reality. So accepting that reality puts us in a position where we can iterate more quickly, where we can roll with the punches and change directions really fast in order to make those failures, short-lived and less impactful. And I think if the more people across the government would embrace that attitude, we would start delivering a lot better services.
So one of our customers, Netflix, assumes constant failure. And
Yeah.
how do you succeed with your mission in an environment where you have constant failure?
Chaos Monkey.
Chaos
I wish
Monkey
we
is
had
beautiful. Yeah.
Chaos Monkey and so many other things. Yeah.
All right, well, we can make sure you get Chaos Monkey. Does anyone have a microphone first? I'll grab a microphone. I would love questions from the audience. I can keep asking these guys questions. I'd love to have some questions from the audience. Yes. What's that? Not working. We'll do shadow puppets. Do you want to ask the question and I'll reiterate? If you say Chris, you've got a 50% chance.
It's a Chris sandwich. It's Chris. and
Yeah,
so
Chris and
they're
Chris,
both on
yeah.
the end. This Chris.
Chris, right here. You said that it took a lot for them to tell you go ahead and move with I can't remember what that was.
The military entrance stuff. Yeah.
Are you finding it easier and more buy-in as you move forward with the project? Are they more involved now?
Okay, do you mind if I can you restate
the question was with the military entrance processing project. Once we kind of got over that initial hump, have we seen more and more buy-in? The answer is yes and no. So there's still pockets within the department that are hesitant or reluctant or even scared that some of the ideas we're bringing to the table may jeopardize their livelihoods, their careers, because they really haven't embraced the change yet. So there's some scared. From the upper management level, it was rough at first. There was still some reluctancy, some hesitancy, but over the last few weeks, where we're trying to the system interfaces with a dozen different external agencies, and we're trying to understand how those all work. Those agencies are very apprehensive themselves to work with us. They're like, who are you, and stuff like this. Over the last couple of weeks, I've noticed a tremendous increase of air cover from the direct commander of US MEPCOM that's just like, just give these guys what they want. All they want is 5 minutes of your time and maybe access to a server. So it wasn't just like an on-off switch where they're like, all right, just take it. We're in your guide. But it has been like Chris kind of laid it out really well when we were going into this. He's just like, show them progress, talk to them every week. Even if you show them the same yellow button this week that you showed them last week, at least they know you're still here and you didn't go away like some of the other consultants or groups they've worked with. So I think because we talk to them every week, they are coming around more and more. But it hasn't been easy, but it's been impactful and great.
You get credit for asking the first question. There's over 9,000 people registered. Thank you for being brave. Who wants to be number 2 right here?
Hey, Chris, you talk.
Mike?
You talked about some of the challenges that you face, and I noticed that you all addressed the challenges that are a lot of the support services. But I know that the federal government is very reluctant to take any risks when you're talking about data that is classified. Can you address some of those classification issues and what the commercial sector has to do in order to penetrate that market and make the government feel secure that, you know, data is going to be, data's going to be safe?
Sure. You know, it's interesting. Admiral Rogers from NSA and Cybercom came by our office a couple weeks ago, and he said a thing that kind of always resonates with me. He's like, you guys are incredibly optimized for unclassified work, right? And it's interesting to him, right? Because we're like a little oasis within the Pentagon. Like, you come into our office and we have Wi-Fi, we have cell phones, we have everybody's on laptops and tablets, and it doesn't look like the Pentagon, right? It looks like, it's literally you go into any other office in the Pentagon and it's like, what? It's so different, right? And that is by design, because we optimized for exactly as you said. So the question is, hey, here we have, it seems like you guys are doing a lot on the unclassified side, but how does commercial help the government deal with these things on the classified side as well? And I think that the approach that we've taken is that if we can do really well by teaching these lessons on the unclass side, it will create a lift that will pull them into a bunch of other areas that we didn't anticipate. And that has been increasingly true. We have a program that is called Hack the Pentagon, which I mentioned, which it's basically a bug bounty, right? We allow the hackers all over the world to just like hack the shit out of our stuff at the DoD. And what's interesting about it is we have both public and private assets. One of the things that we did is we did things that we call file transfer mechanisms, which help move things between networks within the Department of Defense. And you know, we did it on the unclass side, but it has wide-ranging impact across the entire Department of Defense, right? And we worked with, you know, the IDIQ at the DoD that sits out there is with HackerOne and with CENAC. And in the case of this private one that we ran, we actually had to put it in Amazon GovCloud. We had to do a bunch of stuff that was not typical for how CENAC would do bounties because of the sensitivity of some of the information. So I don't know that there's an easy answer besides this. I think that if you really, really want to make an impact and make inroads into all these areas from unclass all the way up to the highest levels of classification, one thing that is very, very helpful is to be able to prove it out in the unclass side, because then you can actually get scale and get people interested in it. But I can say that if you have a solution that can't run on something like a GovCloud or a C2S, then, you know, that's going to be really, really hard. You're probably not going to get there. So I think that having things that can run on those types of solutions will help you quite a bit. And proving yourself out at the scale on the unclass is definitely where we sit. Like, we like to first hit that area before jumping all the way up to the classified stuff. I'm happy to talk more about it later, though.
Thank you. We've got another question up front.
Morning. Hello, test. Good morning, Lieutenant Colonel Simons from Headquarters AMC, Air Mobility Command out at Scott. I'm the Air Force lead for Transcom Sprint to the Cloud, so I'm part of that team. And so my question is, though, you know, the technical aspect of it, to be honest with you, is fairly easy when if you have an open aperture and can do what you want. But who's working the other side, the whole life cycle management of after we get it, the sustainment all the way through to the end? So that's the part that a lot of my folks are concerned with, of the programmatics that goes with it, because we've got the acquisition laws that we still have to follow, and the corporate governance processes, and when it takes us over 30 weeks to buy a piece of equipment, that's a problem. So who's working on that aspect of it? You all kind of have the luxury of bypassing a lot of the stuff that we don't.
That's a great question. Because the fact of the matter is, a lot of the time the U.S. Digital Service has been acting in a firefighting capacity, which is great because never waste a crisis, right? Whenever something is literally on fire, people are willing to try a lot of new things. And so that works very well. But there's also the sort of change agent, changing the culture aspect to it as well. So one part of the U.S. Digital Service is what we call the procurementati. They're procurement folks, and they're not, I mean, a lot of people think, hey, we're t-shirt wearing, not quite college kids, but, freshly out of college. Well, you're wearing a t-shirt. It's pretty.
You got one part of that right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not quite out of college.
So it was great because we had a demo day for the Office of Management and Budget, and we had the director stop by, and I told him, by the way, this person has been working on procurement for 15 years, and Mick Mulvaney, who's a cabinet secretary, gave him a hug, because he's like, I was on a committee that helped small businesses. I know how hard procurement is. So then there was another guy, Brent, and he was like, well, I've been doing it for 10 years, and he gave him a hug too. And then Erica, the last procurement person, was like, 8 years, and so everybody got a hug from director of the OMB, which was fantastic, but kind of makes the point that unless you fix the underlying problems, the culture, you're not going to make anything better. And so those teams have been working on trying to figure out, they've been training contracting officers, how to run better programs. And some of those, for example, one of those folks went back and worked on Hack the Pentagon and changed the cost of a security vulnerability from $13,000 to $1,100. So when you show those kinds of quantifiable results, eventually you can take good steps toward changing the culture. I know there's also been people offering feedback. Every year you've got the NDAA, you've got opportunities to think about doing pilots and those sorts of things. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that.
One other thing so that's a procurement side. The other piece you said is the sustainment side. One thing we've been looking at, and we're talking with another Army project, they're training. They're bidding out right now, and they're doing 3 prototypes. The prototypes are competing prototypes, and eventually one of those will win and move on to the actual development. What we're strongly lobbying for is to do the foundational stuff way up front, because a lot of times when we're firefighting, we're coming in midstream and saying, hey, let's paint this jet while it's mid-flight, right? So we're trying to get ahead of the curve and saying, look at DevOps up front, do the foundational things, because once in a while you pick a contractor that doesn't live up to your expectations. With proper foundations, the DevOps and everything, all this stuff is packaged nicely that you can swap contractors midstream, and it's not going to happen overnight or right away, but eventually we'll reach a point where you can switch contractors and not lose a heartbeat, right? And that's one of the things we're trying to push for, and that's one of the pieces on the OCX GPS project we were looking at is if we can push a button and deploy this anywhere, it doesn't matter who pushes the button. Once it goes into sustainment, someone else can take it and run with it, and you don't have to worry about all this subject matter expertise living amongst people. It's all built in the foundation and can go out.
We've got one more question. Sure.
I was wondering if you could speak to you were talking about risk-taking within the government and reducing risk by deploying strategies that are effective in the private sector. But I was wondering if you could talk about the institutional managerial features that take what is a government employee, which is the most secure job you can get, and turns them into a completely risk-averse person who doesn't want to take those steps, even when not doing anything is accepting the risk of doing nothing.
It's interesting because I think the current process does not take into account opportunity cost. So when you have a new system, you might have to go through 271 controls to be able to launch something. And that creates an environment where people don't want to launch things. It's a lot of hassle. If you have a bad procurement, then you want to fix that by getting it all done earlier. And so you end up with these larger and larger cycles that are more and more painful. And I think moving away from that and thinking about the opportunity cost in real world ways. We have seen systems that were running, Outlook, Exchange Server 2003, unpatched, right? And so yes, the cloud might not have all of these compliance boxes checked yet, but compared to the existing system, it's so much better. So I think trying to bring that sort of a view is helpful. I think another tactic that often works very well is one of the core values of the U.S. Digital Service is to build momentum or create momentum. And so starting with something small can often demonstrate, there's a change in culture coming, there's a change in ways of doing things, there's a change in best practices. The old way of doing things, the old ways of not embracing, avoiding risks are not acceptable anymore. There are lives on the line, there are soldiers' people's lives on the line, there are patients' lives on the line, and until we can get to a better functionality where people don't expect to wait 130, 140 days to get their application back, we're not going to change that culture. So I think it starts small, but even prototypes, even those, like what can we churn out? I'll give you one very simple example. Whenever a veteran applies for disability, if that gets denied, then you do a disability claims appeal. That can take 5 to 7 years. And the attorneys have to look at every single page before they make their determination. We saw a very simple hack, which was they had to download all these PDFs one by one. And so we said, you know what, let's just make it so you can download all the PDFs at once. It's the equivalent of like a Chrome extension. It's basically a nothing burger, right? But that saved hours and hours of attorney time. It's the first step that gets you in the door. And then what you'll find once you get through that door is there are all kind of people in the trenches who know that the way that things work now is not the perfect way, that it can be better. They want to make it better, and so we just have to find the way to empower those voices, to make them louder, to give them the air cover so that the right things can happen. Because over and over and over again, having come into government, I find all kinds of people who want to do the right thing if only they get the chance. And I think starting small is one way where you can start to sort of break that ice a little bit.
Can I just add one small thing? Don't be too lost in the belief that this is the absolute way that it must be done. Right? A lot of times I will have somebody say, oh, well, we're not allowed to. That's against the law. And they're not. They're actually just, you can do it. They're not against the law. It's just that somebody one time said that, and then somebody passed that on, and then it's like phone game, and then all of a sudden, everybody's like, well, you're going to end up, in a prison. That's definitely not true. I've rarely seen anything that looks like that. So I think sometimes it's just actually drilling into what is doable.
Got another question right up front.
All right. Is there a digital service presence in Defense Healthcare Agency or VHA? And then my specific use case would be around Cerner being a technical solution on both sides.
Sure.
And driving down to the physical infrastructure that supports Cerner today. And is there a push to say, hey, there might be a smarter way to host that going forward?
Sure. So at least Defense Digital Service, we function with basically across the entire department. So we led in conjunction with Tony Curta over in PNR, from the DoD side, the recent announcement about VA and Cerner. Worked with Stacy Cummings over in the PO office for Cerner. So yeah, we're very interested in those things. We've done numerous projects in the area around DHA. As a matter of fact, when I first came out I started originally with United States Digital Service, working on service treatment records, which are the records that veterans ultimately send over to the VA in order to get their treatment and care, and saw some really bad things that happen when systems don't talk together, which sort of led us to have a very strong opinion about how the recent announcement should be done. So we continue to look for things within DHA and all these different areas to make sure that we can provide great benefits for not only our military, which deserve it, but also when they leave active duty, and make sure that they're taken care of.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for getting up early today, making it here to the Public Sector Summit. Can I have a round of applause for our panelists? Number one, for the great answers they had to your questions, but more importantly, for the great work they do for the government. Thank you. Have a great summit. Look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you all.